Sounds great. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know people will continue to trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Before I do, please use the chat and QA function. Trying to make this as interactive as possible. I'll try to answer questions as I'm going throughout it. So feel free to ask, anything about the content, or I'll be talking about my background a little bit if you want to learn a little bit more about my story. Please, utilize that QA function, and let's have some fun while we go through this right before lunch. So today I'm going to be talking about kind of what I do in my day-to-day job. I work at McDonald's Corporation here in Chicago, Illinois, in their global internal audit, and but I'm on the IT side. So what I'm doing is providing assurance, cybersecurity assurance to the organization through a variety of audits that are IT focused. And specifically what I do, or primarily what I do, are ethical hacking, internal penetration testing, doing hands-on keyboards, acting as, an actual nefarious actor would, trying to go after, sensitive data, whether it's customer employee data, legal documentation, trying to get access to treasury accounts, whatever the target is. We kind of develop an audit in order to, assess the security controls that are in place to prevent, what would be an actual nefarious actor of getting to kind of what we deem high value here at the organization. One quick note before I start: I'm in a room that has kind of like a timed light, so if it goes dark on me, just give me a second. I'll be right back. So moving forward, then. Quick agenda, give a brief introduction of who I am. I'll also provide an overview of kind of other IT audit engagements outside of ethical hacking, because it is kind of a large domain. And what I'm doing is very unique within the IT audit world, as well as, I know you're all students, and I didn't understand what IT audit was when I was coming out of high school. And so it's an area that you may be unfamiliar with, so I'll be able to provide a background there. From there, I'll go in and kind of give a deep dive on exactly what penetration testing and ethical hacking is all about, or at least how we perform it here at McDonald's. I'll give a brief overview on some of the key themes that I've identified through the number of assessments I've done since joining McDonald's, and then finally, QA. But again, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. Again, want to make this interactive as we go throughout it. So, quick introduction. I grew up in Indiana, in Fishers, just outside of Indianapolis, with the Hamlin Southeastern High School. I know most people here are from Indiana, so but that might be a little bit relevant. After graduating, went down to IU and was actually a political science major. Didn't really think about doing technology. Really had a love for history and politics coming out of high school, so kind of that's what I wanted to do. But as I neared graduation, I kind of realized that I either had two options. I could either go to law school, or I could go work in the public sector. And I had an internship in the public sector, and the pace was extremely slow. And I just kind of realized that, maybe not the best place for me to kind of develop skill sets. And as far as law goes, my brother and my brother-in-law are both lawyers, and they told me not to go to law school. So that's pretty eye-opening. So, looking around, there was a program at IU called the MSIS program, or Masters of Science in Information Systems, which is a one-year program that they've developed that, really targets and tailors towards people with liberal arts backgrounds to provide that IT foundational skill set to go back into the workforce and, be able to, get a job within the IT world. And so after graduating, went to a company called Protiviti here in Chicago. It's a medium-sized consulting firm that really focuses on compliance and IT compliance, and specifically around Sarbanes-Oxley, or what's called SOX. And for those of you that don't know, back in the early 2000s, there was a company called Enron who were cooking their books and falsifying their financial records. And so once that was discovered, this regulation came in place, SOX, that is basically developed to provide assurance and accountability to Wall Street that these publicly traded companies, the finances that they're reporting on, are actually accurate. So that's what I did for about 2 years, but always knew that it's pretty cookie cutter, the same sort of framework over and over again at a number of different clients. And when I was in school, I did a specialization in cybersecurity, and I knew that that was kind of the route I wanted to go down. So you'll see also within that line SOC 2 and NIST. Those are more cyber focused type engagements. And I got a little bit of hands-on experience there and knew that's kind of the path I wanted to go down. So after leaving Protiviti, went to a company called Manpower Group and started working on this internal framework that they developed called the Top 32 Cybersecurity Control. So we'd go to different countries around the world and assess them on these top 32 that, consisted of things like validating encryption and was in place for data at rest as well as data in transit, making sure that they're patching their servers accurately, that they're doing vulnerability scans and addressing those vulnerabilities timely, as well as, basic things like user access, password management, etc. But again, it was still very framework focused and wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And so when we moved back to Chicago, found this opportunity at McDonald's that is actually hands-on keyboard. We're doing these ethical hacking exercises. It's a lot more just kind of, you feel like you're in the weeds a bit more. And I think it's really important from me, especially as I'm, relatively new to the IT world, to kind of get hands on into the environment. And it's helping me connect, all the different areas within technology because it is such a massive, complex domain. And so it's been a really incredible experience here so far. And, I'm really passionate about what I do right now. And I'm hoping that, this presentation kind of provides some passion to you as well. So before I do that, quick overview on other common IT engagements. I already talked about SOCs, but there's other regulatory engagements, PCI, DSSS, making sure that credit card data is stored properly, GDPR, privacy over in Europe, as well as CCP, which is privacy in California. Those are pretty common. Accreditation, so things like SOC 2 or SOC 1 that I mentioned earlier. It's basically just validating that companies, what they're talking about is true. And then information security, NIST, blue team, penetration tests, kind of what I'm doing right now. So here is kind of a broad overview of what an attack chain can look like. You've got your nefarious actor there on the left. He's trying to get access to the infrastructure on the back end. Most of the time, they'll be doing it coming in from the internet, getting through some firewalls, however it is that they want to get inside the environment and then start sniffing around, seeing where they can escalate access, move around laterally, those types of things. And so that's kind of what we do when we're performing our engagement. So we'll go, for example, we're doing a market audit right now for a company or one of our countries in Southeast Asia. And so we send a physical device to their company and they plug it in on their user VLAN. So simulating either, an employee on the inside who wants to be a bad actor or potentially a contractor, or, someone was able to get into their office and plant the device and get access to their network. That's what we're trying to simulate because our understanding is, and our belief is that there are two types of companies in the world, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And so we're taking the external aspect out of it just because we know at some point these companies, these countries are going to have some sort of malicious activity on the inside. So we're simulating that to understand, in the event of that type of scenario, what can a malicious actor get their hands on? Can they get back to our corp network from the country networks, those types of things. And so, the basic methodology of this is first you do some reconnaissance. We like to compare it to being in a city, right? This country, their network, their IT network is like a city. You get planted in the city. How do you navigate around? So we'll start doing some scans to see what kind of buildings are there. Do these buildings have their lights on? Are there people active? Like what kind of services are going on in those buildings? Those types of things. From that reconnaissance, we'll have an understanding of, maybe some of the high value targets that we want to go after. And so we'll start to try to gain initial access at that point. Because right now we just have a device, right? We don't have anybody's credentials. We don't have anybody's username, that type of thing. But once we're able to get that access, what vulnerabilities can we take advantage of as well? Anything that's just kind of, low-hanging fruit that can provide us some initial access as well. And then from there, can we escalate our access into something like domain admin or server admin? Can we get our hands on backups? If we get our hands on backups, can we perform a ransomware attack? Lateral movement, moving across the system, seeing if we can get access to the treasury, to legal department, to HR, where is that sensitive data? do we have the access to get our hands on that data? And then finally, we'll test our ability to actually remove that data from the actual environment. And so, that's kind of an overview on what a standard penetration test looks like. So reconnaissance, what's out there? We'll use a tool called Nmap, and it's a basic functionality on Linux and Windows devices where it'll show you what ports are open. Is it a web server? So is it a hosting website? Is there a SQL port open? Therefore, is it a database server? Those types of things. So we'll look for that. And a lot of times with these scans, we'll be able to identify weaknesses like SMB signing. So with SMB signing, it's basically a way for a machine to validate that whatever one's talking to them is actually who they are. And so if SMB signing is disabled, we're able to spoof that and take advantage of that and potentially gain credentials that way. We're able to identify egregious vulnerabilities there at the bottom, like WannaCry. So WannaCry came out in the early 2010s, maybe mid 2010s. And basically, if the servers are running WannaCry, we can run a script that will elevate our access to local domain or local administrator on the box that that vulnerability exists on. So, even by doing just a quick amount of reconnaissance, we can identify what are kind of the initial weak points within the environment that we're in that we can take advantage of. Intrusion, taking advantage of insecure configuration. So starting from the left there, LLMNR and NetBIOS, what these are discovery protocols. These are basic Windows functionalities that basically allow different workstations to communicate with one another. And so,
hey, Kyle.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Jessica. We're just seeing the title screen. Is there supposed to be, we're not seeing the screen, the slides advance.
Oh, interesting. Let me pull it back up. Can you see that?
Great, yes, thank you, awesome.
Okay. So I'll back up just a few slides just so that you can kind of see it.
I was able to see all of them, so I'm just wondering if it was a refresh.
Okay.
But if other people are having issues, then go ahead and go back through and show them really quickly. Yeah, Ethan's saying he was able to see it, so it might have just been.
Okay. Well, then I'll just continue on as we were then. So as I was saying, LLMNR, NetBIOS, these are discovery protocols. So basically, these were put in place by Microsoft to have workstations talk to one another. So basically, usually, let's say you're working at your computer and you need to talk to the printer that's down the hall. But for whatever reason, you're unable to find that printer looking at the DNS records. What your machine will do automatically without the user even noticing it is it'll reach out to other, user workstations around you saying, hey, have you seen this printer that I'm looking for? And so what we can do because of these protocols is we can actually kind of spoof that communication and plant ourselves in the middle of it and read and capture that traffic and say, hey, you know what, I'm that printer you're looking for. And their workstation will send us their username and their hashed password without the user even realizing it. And so it's a way for us to kind of harvest credentials without any, initial access. Telnet is another, similar kind of insecure protocol that allows us to, eavesdrop on sessions and capture user credentials and other information in clear text. And then IPv6, because, we've been running IPv4 basically since the inception of the internet. And, as the internet has grown and more devices have been connected to it, we're running out of IP addresses to hand out. And so IPv6 has been introduced recently, but with it is actually, insecure in its current state because not every single IPv6 address has been provided at this point. We can say, when Windows, Windows clients, that are recently commissioned are looking for IPv6, that is their priority in just the way that they're structured. And so if IPv6 is enabled on those workstations, we can say, hey, we can give you an IPv6 address, and the workstation will come to us and say, great, can I have one? And then it'll give us their hash. So it's just a way for us to, again, plant ourselves in the middle and try to gather some initial credentials. So here's just kind of a diagram of exactly that NetBIOS LLM&R attack I was talking about. You'll see, the victim client there. Number one, where is Joe's server? Where is that printer that I'm looking for? To the DNS server. The DNS server will say, it's not there. I don't know where it is. So then at that point, the victim and client goes down and says, broadcast to the stations around and say, anybody seen that server? And then again, as I said, we'll plant ourselves saying, hey, on that server, it'll send us the hash password, and we'll capture that hash one, but we can also relay that hash to a domain controller, and we can understand where or what systems or services within the environment that user has access to just by relaying a hash password, not even getting that password in plain text. And just to take a quick second, so for those of you that may not know, a hash password is a single one-way mathematical computation to take your plain text password, call it password123, run it through this algorithm, and it'll have a hashed value. But the thing is, and the thing that makes them insecure is that, there's different hashing protocols, for example, like NTLM. Every time password123 goes through the NTLM hash algorithm, the output is the same. And so what we can do using tools, and I'll talk about this here in the next slide, is we can take a dictionary of common passwords and feed it through a tool called Hashcat. And it'll say, okay, so we've captured these passwords. Here's the dictionary of passwords. And it'll basically do like a side-by-side check and say, is there anybody running password123? Is there anybody running Big Mac 123? For whatever, and the tool will do it for us and say, hey, these two hash values are the same. It's this password. And so that's kind of how we take it from a hashed password and get it into plain text. So let me know if you have any questions on that. We will be talking about it here. Password guessing and password cracking. So you can see this is an example of Hashcat and what it looks like. So you'll put in Hashcat, the tool, the mode, which is the hash value, and then the rule and the word list. And then you'll execute it, it'll run, and it'll say remove 4 hashes that you previously found, but then you can see those hash values that right there, Thug Suite IE 89. So anytime Thug Suite 89 comes out, it'll be the same hash value every time. And so that's how we're able to get it from a hash form into plain text. And so then at that point, once we have, here's another screenshot from Hashcat showing, we plugged in 11 hashed passwords, and we got 5 back in plain text. Exploitation, unpatched, and vulnerabilities. So unpatched operating systems and software, technical debt is what we call it. And for example, we've seen instances where companies are still running Windows 2003, Windows 2008, which Microsoft has not supported for a number of years at this point. And so anytime an additional vulnerability is discovered on those operating systems, there are currently no patches being applied. And so it's a really easy target for us to go after and, either get local administrator or whatever it may be. The WannaCry Eternal Blue is what I was talking about earlier, where if we find this vulnerability on a server, we can run a script and get local administrator on that machine, and therefore, basically have full control over that machine. And then at that point, we're able to dump memory and a couple of other attacks that may be able to provide us additional credentials to the environment. And then other insecure protocols such as, SMB without SMB signing, DNS configurations. SMB is a really great target for us because every Windows machine has it. And so we're able to do things like enumerating shares. So file share, sometimes people are storing password files in their file shares, and they're just open to everybody if you just run a simple command. So just kind of an overview of unpatched vulnerabilities and how we might compromise them. Testing some controls. This is enumerating the environment. So, we've captured people's hashes through the LLM&R NetBIOS poisoning. We've taken the hash passwords, we put them into the cracker. Big Mac 123, password 123 came back. Okay, so we have initial access in the environment. What are we going to do at this point? At that point, you're able to, any end user in the environment can communicate to domain controllers because that's how they're getting access throughout the environment, right? And so just standard user, we can communicate to the domain controller, say, hey, I would love to see everybody that's in this domain, all the computers, what the password policy is, what groups those people are a part of, what kind of group policy settings are in place. And so we'll do that, and it'll provide us a massive overview. It'll provide us all the details of that environment. And it's really powerful because I'll talk about it in a little bit. We can use a tool called Bloodhound, which will actually provide us a graphical map of you're this person, you would like to get to domain admin. What does the attack chain look like? Can you specify NTLM? So NTLM is, and this is a question in the chat from Aiden, NTLM is just a hashing algorithm. So again, password 123 goes through the NTLM hash. It'll come out as, the hash value ABCD 35GTZXY. So that's just kind of all it is it's just a hashing algorithm. So it's just a one-way computational algorithm that anytime you put a password through, it'll be, put into that hash and outputted the same every time. Password 123 will be the same every time. I hope that answers the question. So Kerber roasting attack is a way for us to, it's just another way to get, initial access. There are these things called SPNs, user SPNs or computer SPNs, which are typically service accounts. So they're typically higher privileged. And so once you have initial access, you can request any of these SPN Kerberos tickets just because you have access. They are, it's similar to NTLM where it's a one-way hash. Kerber roasting has a couple more nuances, but basically with, grabbing those Kerberos tickets, if they are relatively, weak passwords, we're able to just crack them and elevate our access just by running this one simple command and getting an output of the Kerberos tickets. So this is an example of Bloodhound, which you can see. So it's saying, okay, I'm in the domain users group. I'd love to get to the domain admins group for this domain. How exactly does that look like? And so all you can see is, okay, as domain users, you're a part of the administrators group. Obviously, this is a very weak example. It's a lot more complicated than this. But it's just, you can see the power of this tool by giving you a layout of the LAN to see where are the vulnerabilities, what steps do I need to take in order to get to that final destination that I'm looking for. Privilege escalation. One way we're able to really do this is by something called secret dump or WMI exec, basically dumping memory out of the box that we have access to. And so once, taking that WannaCry example, for example, if we're able to get local administrator on a box, we have full control over that box. We can dump the memory, which stores things like, if you're lucky, you can actually get plain text passwords out of memory, which is very nice. You can see another hash value called an NT hash of the, any users that have local credentials on that box. So there's always going to be an administrator account. A lot of times you'll see like a SQL service account that'll have a local admin account. The possibilities are endless here, but basically this is a way for us to harvest additional credentials, harvest additional hashes in order to, broaden our approach and our access throughout the environment. And one of the things that you're really trying to accomplish with this is if you're able to secret stump a domain controller, so if you're able to get local admin or domain admin on the domain controller and you perform a secret stump, you get the hashed value of every single user's password in the environment. And so when you're able to do it, it's actually really fun because the screen just keeps going for about 5 minutes and you're just getting, tens of thousands of people's passwords. And it's a really cool sense of accomplishment, I'm not gonna lie. So, at this point, we've gathered all this access, we've escalated our access throughout the environment. The way we like to look at it is domain admin is great, administrator privileges are great, but what is the impact of that? And so that's what we're trying to do at this point is domain admin is in itself an audit observation for sure, but it's more of a vessel in order to prove what an attacker can get their hands on, right? And so this is when we're trying to do things like move from one country to another, move from the office environment to the restaurant environment. Can we get access to SQL databases and get access to the production data as well as the backup data? And if so, then we could argue that we could make, a ransomware attack actually happen in the real world. Are we able to get on people's emails and look through their emails and find, healthcare information, bank account information, those types of things? Are we able to get through file shares and find people's passports or birth certificates, those types of things? Getting access to customer data through, in our cloud environments, things like that. So again, the domain admin is in itself extremely powerful, but it's only what can you show you can do with that access that really drives the point home, especially in an audit department like my own, because while we are an IT group, we sit in finance. And so our audience for our audit reports are typically a little more business focused. And so we have to draft our audit reports in a way that shows, okay, yeah, the technology supports all of this business functionality. If the technology is compromised, how can that impact the business? Can we make it impossible for customers to talk to our app and place orders in the restaurant via our app? That would have a massive brand image on it, or a negative impact on our brand image, as well as if kiosks for some reason are compromised in the restaurants, is a hacker able to get access to customer credit card data? Thankfully not. We have it set up, so don't worry. Your credit cards are very safe here at McDonald's, so do not worry about that. But those are the types of things that we need to assess. Just because as audit, we are independent validating the assurance of our technical security controls in the McDonald's network and environment. So at this point, we've gathered the valuable information. Can we prove that an attacker would be able to get that sensitive information out of the environment that we are in outside of the network? Because that's additionally going to provide, can they get our employee data from the inside onto the black web, the dark web, and start selling it as a profit? So we try to test that as well when we're conducting these assessments. So some common key themes that I've seen, I think I've done about 10 or so of these engagements at this point at McDonald's. Weak passwords is a big one. As I was talking with those hashes, the weaker the password, the easier it is for us to compromise them. And so, that is something, basically, cybersecurity defense comes down to one thing, and it's all about putting enough roadblocks in place. As my manager calls it, it's an onion, right? So you want to protect the kernel of the onion, the center of the onion, and each layer of the onion is the defense mechanisms in place. So are there enough defense mechanisms in place to dissuade an attacker from trying as hard as they can to get to the core of that onion? And that's really what cybersecurity comes down to. If 16-character passwords are in place, at this point, you would have to have massive computational power in order to crack those. It's very hard when the longer the password is for an attacker to compromise them. And so I would say, that's probably the big one, is any password that, or any application that you have access to, where especially if you're, like your bank account or, your healthcare login information, that type of thing, make that a very strong, long password, because that's going to be your biggest defense against it. Next is the default and insecure Windows configurations. That's what I was talking about with the NTLM v2, or excuse me, the LLM&R and NetBIOS attack, where they're trying to communicate to other workstations. There's no reason for workstations to talk to one another. It's just not required in today's world. And so, making sure you secure those so that other workstations aren't talking to one another is really important. Lack of multi-factor. We've had a couple of instances where we were able to, with end user passwords, get into their Office 365, environment, just because multi-factor wasn't in place. Access controls, especially around like file shares. I've had it a couple times where I found legal or tax file shares just using, basic end user access or like a training account, just because they have it set up so that everybody in the environment can access that file share. patching processes, if you patch your servers, we're not going to be able to take advantage of things like WannaCry, and then weak or no antivirus. The memory dumping is really powerful, but only if it's not, getting triggered. And so these are just kind of a couple of common themes. I think Aiden was asking earlier, he was saying that he's trying to learn cybersecurity, and he's looking for some tools. And if you're really interested in this ethical hacking domain, there's 2 websites I would recommend. First would be Hack the Box, and the other one would be Try Hack Me. Basically what these are is they set up virtual machines for you, and they'll give you detailed documentation on each server will have kind of a flag to capture. And so you get hands-on experience working with tools like the tool we use for the LM&R capture is called Responder. So it'll give you an opportunity to work with a tool like Responder. And it'll kind of help you connect the dots between all the different areas within IT and kind of how hackers are targeting them and taking advantage of those vulnerabilities. And so at this point, I'll just open it up for questions. I see only one in the QA. I think the chat's been relatively busy, so I'll see if there's any in there. But yeah, basically, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The floor is open.